Michael Ivaroni came to prominence as an owner in the USA as the owner of the champion colt Big Brown, the winner of the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness Stakes. Michael, though, has been leading owner in the US 2 out of the past 3 years, and he's joining me at Strawberry Hill Start after a deal was struck to bring Big Brown to Australia to stand at Vinery. Welcome back to Australia, Michael, and tell me, how did this deal come about?
Well, we met with John Singleton now about 5 months ago. He was introduced to me from a friend of a friend, and he said the idea of standing the horse in the Southern Hemisphere was something that was possible. So we came over and met with John, and I instantaneously fell in love with Australia, with Vinery, and with the gentleman that owned Vinery. And John's a first-class individual, and it's an honor to be a partner with him.
Take us back to the beginning with Big Brown. He obviously became an absolute colt horse in America with the Kentucky Derby, win the Preakness and so forth. Just such a, well, we'll go through the story of Big Brown. But your first sight of the actual horse, I know you bought him after that wonderful win at Saratoga on the grass there. Your first thoughts when you saw the horse?
Well, I was actually at a friend's house. The horse was running up in Saratoga, and I usually go to Saratoga. I spend the whole meet up in Saratoga. And for some reason, I left Saratoga about a week early. I'm sitting in a friend's house watching the race on television, not expecting to see anything special from anybody. And I see a horse explode, win by 15 lengths around 2 turns at Saratoga as a 2-year-old. Immediately called up my trainer and said, you know, I need to own this horse. And after 3 weeks of negotiations, we finally put him in our camp, and very fortunate.
In America, Big Brown's really seen, I guess, as more of, a lot of Americans think of him as a grass horse, whereas Australians think of him as a dirt horse. But that initial win at Saratoga on the grass was absolutely devastating.
Every rider that's ever been on him, that has been on him on the dirt and on the grass, has said he's better on the grass. He's smoother, he's more fluid, he's more athletic. But I think the brilliant ones can translate their abilities to any type of surface. And in America, we run in 3 different types of surfaces. So there are big races on all those different variations. In America, he was seen as a dirt horse only because he won the Kentucky Derby. In our eyes, he's just a brilliant racehorse that can translate his ability and his pedigree to any surface.
So once you'd bought Big Brown, what was the progress from there? Obviously, it was an amazing win in the Florida Derby, the first horse to win from gate 12 there, which of course he was going to do in the Kentucky Derby. But what was the plan then? Did you think of him instantly as a Kentucky Derby type horse before the Florida Derby?
Well, when we purchased him, we had the hopes that he can translate his grass ability to the dirt. We just didn't know for sure, and you never do know for sure. So we paid $4 million for him after he was purchased for $190,000 as a yearling. So that was a pretty good investment for us now, but in the eyes of many of the Americans, when we made the investment, they thought we were on the edge of spending well too much money. When we put him on the dirt, he improved, but I think his maturity from 2 to 3 was his improvement, not so much the surface. And then when we ran him in the allowance race in early March at Gulfstream, that race was critical, because if he didn't show up that day on the dirt, the Kentucky Derby would never even been in our plans. And then we were able to run him back on 24 days rest and win the Florida Derby, and that's what springboarded him, obviously, to favoritism in the Kentucky Derby. But anytime you have a horse in America go from the grass to the dirt for the first time, there's a variable that exists and a question mark, and he fell right into that category, but we're fortunate that it worked out well for us.
Usually there are different types of horses, aren't there? You do have more of the pulling sort of a horse, or you have the horses using their hindquarters a lot on the turf, so they're usually a slightly different type of horse, but he, as you said, seems to fit all bills.
Yeah, he has a little bit of a high action, which is unusual for brilliant dirt horses in America. That's why I always felt he was a grass horse. American horses that get over the dirt very well have that low extended action. He has more of an upright action, so you're always concerned with them not being able to push off behind on that kind of surface. But he just was so athletic and so brilliant that he was able to get through anything.
The draw for the Kentucky Derby, well, he drew gate 20. You actually did the draw for gate 20, which was obviously going to keep him out of trouble. But what did you feel drawing that gate?
Well, I think that whole situation was overrated, I think is the best way to put it. The way they draw in America is a 2-tier draw. The first thing is you draw for the order in which you select your post position. And we were unfortunate enough to draw 17 out of 20. So at the end, we were only down to 3 post positions we can draw from. One of them was the inside post position, which we totally did not want because of traffic problems. And then you had 18 and 19 and 20. So we felt there's not much of a difference between post 18 and post 20, and by taking post 20, at least we know we'd have no other horses breaking outside of us, able to cross over on us. So we knew we'd get a good trip. It was a question of how much ground can you lose going 1.25 miles and still have enough stamina to finish at the end. And he was able to overcome all of it with great ease.
Take us through the actual running of the race, your thoughts through the race, because he was obviously wide, he was out of trouble. But, you know, you see the jockey, the head go down, it looks as if the horse is just full of running. Were you confident through the run?
Well, I wasn't. I think going into the first turn, when you see the jockey looking to his left, looking to find a place to tuck in and not being able to tuck in and getting stacked 6 wide, and then basically having an outside trip and being 4 wide into the second turn, losing all that ground with a horse going 1.25 miles for the first time, I just never felt confident. Everybody around me was going completely crazy. I just felt that it was going to be questionable inside the final 16th. But he accelerated inside the final 16th better than I've ever seen him accelerate. So he just had an unbelievable ability to carry his speed over a long period of ground, and he just had a very high cruising speed, and that's what able to sustain his distance.
And the final furlong of the Kentucky Derby, and it's going to be Big Brown bounding home to a convincing win in the Run for the Roses. It is Big Brown by 5 on the
Such a popular horse too. I know that he was the first horse to be on the front page of the New York Times since Secretariat, and of course the first horse since 1915 to win the Kentucky Derby at just his 4th start. Were you aware at the time of the history he was creating?
Oh, we knew he was up against it. I mean, he was in his 4th lifetime start. He was post 20. He had barriers that he had to overcome that were historic. But at the end of the day, it's a horse race, and Big Brown didn't know that he was going to be the first horse since 1915 to win from post 20, or only the 4th undefeated Kentucky Derby Preakness winner, joining Seattle Slew and Smarty Jones. And I mean, it's just amazing what he had overcome, but he was just a brilliant horse in a horse race. And at the end of the day, you load 19 other horses in, and the best one wins, and he was the best horse.
And what about the lead up to the Preakness Stakes? I guess was the pressure on, or was the pressure eased after his performance in the Derby?
Well, I think he was supposed to win the Preakness. So it puts a little bit more pressure on the connections. There's not a lot you can do. There's only 2 weeks in between, and in America, we like to space our races out 4 or 5 weeks. So he was coming back on short rest. He was the target. He had a bullseye on his back. The jockey had a bullseye on his back. So he had things to overcome in that race, but he was just a superior horse. And at the end of the day, as I said all along, you load him up, and it's a horse race. And he had trouble in the first turn, but it didn't matter because he won that race about as easy as I've ever seen a horse win across the field.
Big Brown's doing it again. He is disappearing from the field. He's in front by 5. And then it's Race Car Rhapsody, and on the outside Macho again, and just cruising into the line. Captain Sorbo looked in the rearview mirror, nobody was there. He waltzes home to win the Preakness. No one's ever been close to Big Brown.
And his trainer, Robert Dutrow Jr., well, he came out and said the horse had been racing on steroids and admitted the fact, although obviously a lot of the opposition was doing the same thing. Do you think that's coloured the perception of some people about just how great this horse was?
I think it was unfortunate for horse racing. It was one of the situations that just kind of made me shake my head. I said, they're questioning a medication that is legal. So what's the question? If you're in a situation where there's 20 horses in the gate and 10 trainers are using it and 10 aren't, every trainer in that race had the opportunity to use any medication that's within the laws of the United States. And they asked 20 trainers, and one of them spoke out, and that was Rick Dutrow. And he spoke the truth and was not going to deny what he did and what he said. And he says that the veterinarians make suggestions to make the horse better, and that's what he uses. As far as the banning of steroids, I came out and I banned steroids for all my horses, and I banned basically every medication for all my horses, because at the end of the day, Big Brown's brilliance was not dependent upon any kind of Winstrol, any kind of Butte, anything. It was his brilliance, and I wanted my horses to go out and prove themselves for what they were, and that were race horses, and not for these steroid machines that somehow the media painted them as.
We'll talk about some of your other horses as well shortly, but going into the Belmont Stakes, of course, that famous quarter crack that he had in the hoof there, the pressure that was on leading into that, I mean, there was talk of death threats, of all sorts of things if the horse didn't win the Belmont. Take us through some of that.
Well, that was the morning of the Belmont. I woke up, there were FBI agents outside my door. I was wondering what happened. And they said that there was a death threat lodged by some extremist group in the United States, saying that if anything should happen to the horse, my family, myself, they're not safe. Things that they're just unfortunate, but they're a part of life. And at no point during the race or after the race did they concern me. I was more concerned about him winning the race and his well-being. And unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. The quarter crack, we don't know to this day, had anything to do with it. It just might have been, as Ken Desormeaux said, no pop tires, but he was out of gas.
At that point then there was the deal, the stallion deal was done. Just take us through that as well.
Well, the stallion deal was done the morning of the Preakness, and it was done with Three Chimneys. It was a pretty simple deal. They bought a small percentage of the horse for entitlement to stay on the horse at Three Chimneys. Very, very well-known top stud farm in America. And we were concerned with putting him in the right place and the longevity of his stud career after his racing was over. And we chose what we felt was the best group of people that would take care of him and treat him like he deserves to be treated, and that's King.
And of course, well, he didn't want to retire on that Preakness performance, so he did have those two last starts for his career. Of course, winning the Haskell, which is a time-honoured Group 1, and also the winning at Monmouth as well. So to win on grass that last start too, I guess stands him in good stead heading towards Australia too, to come back and do that.
Well, that to me was the one race where I could say I cried after. You know, in that race, things did not go his way. He was pressured through very, very fast fractions in the first race back in the grass since the 2-year-old. And he had run in that race against 4 older Grade 1 winners. So he was up against it in that race, and they had him collared in the stretch, and he basically held every horse in that race at bay the entire length of the stretch. And when you watch it back, that's when you understand the brilliance that every other horse was on an all-out drive getting, you know, the stick, and Kent almost sat with the stick in his right hand, and he was just niggling on him, and he could have run around could have ran around the track 4 times and kept those horses at bay.
He is a Danzig Lion stallion, as of course Danehill, our great champion stallion, who's had such a massive influence on Australia. But he does have foals on the ground now. Have you seen some of his foals?
I've gotten some beautiful pictures. I haven't been fortunate enough to go over to Kentucky to see the babies in person, but I know that he's stamping every one of them, and that's what's the most important thing for me right now. And let's see how they come out of the sales and everything else. But right now it looks like we're heading in the right direction out there.